The story begins with a man on the verge of collapse, dragging a massive spike on his back, a severed piece of a monster. Orders had been clear. If they don't move everything before sundown, no one eats. And anyone still breathing had to keep working. The man staggered, his captain caught sight of him and barked at him to get moving. That man's name was Joe Yi, just an ordinary worker trying to scrape by in the apocalypse. And little did he know, he would become the protagonist of this tale. It all began in 2026, when the world faced a disaster beyond imagination. Enormous insects burst from underground, opening countless portals to other worlds, which became known as the abysses. Within them lurked nightmare creatures, as if dungeons from the most brutal games had spilled into reality. Yet the abyss also released a strange radiation. Some humans gained extraordinary powers from it and became known as awakeners. But for those who didn't awaken, survival meant grueling labor. Joe Yi was one of them. He strained to lift the monster part onto a truck, collapsing to his knees in exhaustion. The captain spotted him sitting, stormed over, and slapped him hard across the face. "Quit slacking off and playing the victim," he shouted. Joe cradled his swollen cheek, even worried if the captain's hand hurt more than his face. The man cursed him, calling him useless, and demanded to know if he could work or not. Joe bit his lip and replied that he could. The captain roared that the bodies had to be moved before nightfall or no one would eat, and Joe assured him he'd get it done. Suddenly, the ground trembled, and at first Joe thought it was an earthquake, but terror froze his body when a monster emerged, a gigantic worm-like beast with 4 tusks and a circular maw lined with teeth. "It's alive!" someone screamed, and panic erupted. The survivors ran. Joe turned to flee as well, but a gunshot rang out. Pain exploded in his leg, and when he spun around in shock, the captain had shot him. As Joe collapsed, the man sprinted past him, sneering, "Weaklings are bait." He finally understood he had been abandoned to buy time for the others' escape. Joe trembled. All he wanted was to survive, yet life was mercilessly cruel. He realized powerless people like him were doomed from the start. Tears welled as he thought bitterly about cockroaches, how they could eat anything, never die, and not even abyss radiation could wipe them out. Maybe being a cockroach wouldn't be so bad in the next life. The beast devoured him whole, but instead of death, countless glowing screens appeared before him. Human transformation initiated. Evolution system activated. Attempts failed again and again until finally, reconstruction success. Count: 1,599,999. Joe opened his eyes. The world looked grimy and unfamiliar. Confused, he raised his hand only to realize it wasn't human anymore. In a panic, he stumbled to a cracked mirror and froze. Staring back at him was a cockroach. He screamed, wondering if that hideous creature was truly him. His body had sprouted 2 extra arms, yet strangely they felt natural, like they'd always been there. But then a strange muscle twitched in his back. Wings. They buzzed uncontrollably, lifting him into the air before he crashed headfirst into the wall. Dazed, he realized a slight tension in those back muscles caused the wings to flap. Regret washed over him. If he knew last wishes had power, he'd have prayed for something better. Suddenly, a voice thundered, "Ungrateful fool!" Floating before him was a golden cockroach. It glared at him, insulted that he mocked the cockroach god's blessing. "In 5,000 years, you are the first human to pray for my power," the god declared. "I was prepared to grant you the strongest abilities, but now you regret it." Joe froze. This was just like the isekai novels he read. He hastily called out, "System! No, wait, father!" and bowed his head in apology. The cockroach god said nothing more. It simply vanished. A screen flickered before Joe Yi. System shutdown. Reason: the cockroach god dislikes you. He realized he had just angered his only cheat code. For the next 10 days, he tried everything he could to summon the system. But no matter how much he begged or cursed, it never reappeared. Other cockroaches watched him curiously, wondering what he was doing. And that's when he realized something shocking. He could actually understand their language. On his first night, he sat alone, thinking that joking about becoming a cockroach was one thing, but actually living as one was beyond disgusting. He peeked at a group of roaches nearby enjoying their meal, and he nearly vomited when he saw they were feasting on poop. One cockroach noticed him and happily dragged over a chunk of dung, urging him to eat it while it was fresh. Horrified, Yi turned pale and shouted at it to get away, but the bug kept insisting, even shoving the filth in his face. It finally let him have it, saying it preferred the runny ones anyway. Instinctively, Yi slapped the roach aside, making it crash onto the ground. Hurt, the cockroach whimpered that its feelings were wounded. Yi sighed, apologized, and explained it was only because its breath smelled like pure crap, then told it to go die somewhere else before talking to him again. By the 5th night, Yi just lay flat on the floor, cursing at his miserable fate, because even poop had started to smell appetizing. He knew that if he didn't find something soon, he might actually sleepwalk into a pile of dung. Digging through trash, he remembered from human knowledge that sealed plastics usually blocked smells for normal roaches, which meant there might still be food hidden inside. He tore into a bag labeled 3 years expired and found exactly that. The system flickered to life briefly, identifying it as a rotten pile of egg yolk worth 385 calories, completely edible for him. It looked revolting, but his stomach growled violently. Finally, he gave in and devoured it. To his surprise, it tasted incredible, like a feast made for him. He even cried while eating, realizing that this was exactly what he had wished for, food that roaches could thrive on even if humans couldn't. On the 10th night, the cockroach god still hadn't returned. Yi thought being reborn as a cockroach would make surviving the apocalypse easier, but reality was far harsher. He sank into despair, even considering ending it all, but death wouldn't come easily. As a roach, he couldn't die from falling, drowning, or even poison. His only option would be to find a predator to eat him, but after being devoured once in his past life, the mere thought of it left him shuddering. In the end, survival was forced on him. Still, he realized one advantage. Cockroaches were social insects, and if he could dominate a colony, maybe he could live as their king. For the first time, he felt he didn't need the system. His human intelligence might be enough to thrive. He started by approaching the cockroach beside him, one he nicknamed Little Fatty, and asked if he wanted to team up. Fatty scoffed, mocking him for not even being able to secure fresh poop, and turned him down. Yi realized in this world, power wasn't about comfort but about proving dominance. He knew he needed a chance to show strength. On his 20th day, that chance finally came. A muscular cockroach declared to the colony that they were moving to a better feeding ground, and they could either join or stay behind and wait for predators. One of the smaller roaches wailed about losing their poop supply, while another bawled in fear at the thought of going outside. Yi stared at them in disbelief, wondering if they were truly that pathetic. The big roach demanded volunteers to scout ahead, but silence fell across the group. Yi didn't step forward, thinking he didn't need their scraps anyway, but suddenly the system appeared. It delivered a single message. The cockroach god said that if Yi accepted the mission, he might finally be forgiven. Without hesitation, he raised his hand and volunteered. Little Fatty was stunned, admiring his bravery, while Yi grinned to himself, believing his cheat code had returned. Soon after, the scouts gathered behind tall grass, preparing to cross a dam. Yi thought it looked easy, but Little Fatty trembled, telling him he knew nothing. Every time food ran low, the stronger cockroaches forced the weaker ones to scout, making them walking buffets for predators. "We'll all die," Fatty whimpered. That's when Yi realized this was nothing but a suicide mission, and the cockroach god might be messing with him again by using him as bait. Furious, Yi shouted that he was backing out, but then remembered he had another way to feed them all. Fatty's eyes widened in fear, and Yi was confused by his reaction, until he noticed the massive cockroach looming behind him, asking in a cold voice where exactly he thought he was going. Then it told him that beyond the dam lay monster corpses waiting to be devoured, so it was first come, first served. That's when he realized cockroaches had evolved to feed on interdimensional monsters. One of the smaller roaches squealed in amazement, calling it a never-ending buffet. But Yi looked at the big roach and said flatly that he was on a diet, telling them to go ahead without him. The massive cockroach narrowed its eyes suspiciously before darting forward, clamping its claws around Yi's neck, and growling that if he refused to scout, then he would become dinner instead. In that moment, Yi finally understood that even among insects, the law of survival of the fittest ruled supreme. Back when he was human, his team was always sent out to scavenge because they were weak, disposable bodies, and their leader had told him that searching for food was a privilege. Now he saw that same cruel logic in this oversized cockroach. The brute hurled him to the ground and sneered that he should be grateful for being given a chance to survive. Then it stomped on his head, crushing him into the dirt. Yi clenched his teeth, realizing that if he wanted to live, being able to eat anything wasn't enough. He had to find a way to bring back his cheat code and gain real strength. Crossing the dam, he ordered his brothers to spread out and move carefully, warning them to shout if anything happened. Little Fatty clung desperately to his side, too terrified to let go, which annoyed Yi, but when he looked ahead, he saw something even stranger. Despite not being near a river, waves rippled in front of them, creating barriers on the surface. The big cockroaches sighed in relief, happy that they'd made it halfway across with no trouble, then rushed forward by flying, determined not to let the smaller ones steal all the good stuff. Yi was irritated, thinking how cowardly it was that they had wings but still made the weak do the scouting. Just then, he caught sight of something in the distance, large, glowing red eyes. His heart froze as he realized they weren't stones at all but toads. The colony erupted in panic as the predators lashed out. One cockroach screamed for everyone to run, scatter, and fly, but its cry was cut short as a tongue snatched it midair and crunched it down. More followed, shrieking as they were swallowed alive. The system flashed before Yi's eyes, analyzing the predator. A mutant toad, amphibian, capable of leaping 20 times its body length with a tongue that shot out at 4 meters per second, lined with barbed teeth dripping with paralyzing mucus. But its weakness was clear. It couldn't detect prey that stayed completely still. Yi barked the order for everyone to lie flat and hold their breath, reassuring them that if they didn't move, the monsters couldn't see them. At that moment, the cockroach god's voice echoed, presenting him with two choices: take the safe route and survive, or save another roach and gain his first loyal follower on the path to becoming king. Yi scoffed at first, thinking he could never be a king if he died here. But then he heard little Fatty's desperate cries. When he saw the terror in his eyes, Yi remembered his own helplessness as a human. The one thing he had truly wished for wasn't power, but for someone to turn back and save him. The god's countdown began. Yi clenched his mandibles, scooped Fatty up, and hurled himself into the air, shouting at him to go on a diet while dodging tongues that snapped around them. "Bro, I love you," Fatty wailed, and Yi snapped back to shut up because his breath was distracting. Suddenly, everything went dark. Yi looked up to see that they were flying straight into the gaping maw of a toad. Without hesitation, he flung Fatty aside, sacrificing himself as the beast swallowed him whole. Fatty turned in horror, watching him vanish between the monster's teeth, crushed in an instant. But then the system appeared again, declaring that Yi had passed the test of the cockroach god. His selflessness had moved him, and the system was reactivated. New traits flooded his body: devour all things, sticky tongue, acidic mucus, all abilities absorbed from the mutant toad. His body convulsed, and the toad exploded from within as Yi tore his way out, dripping with blood, now standing in a humanoid form smeared in green. A notification appeared. Blind body unlocked. The cockroach god's voice boomed, declaring that even in the direst moment, Yi upheld righteousness, making him worthy to be his successor. Staggering forward, Yi asked if this meant he didn't have to stay a cockroach forever. The god explained that the strength of a cockroach lay in its resilience and indestructibility, and that his form no longer mattered since his essence was already unbreakable. Yi rubbed his head awkwardly and admitted that he had sucked at Chinese class, begging the god to put that into simpler words. The cockroach god yelled at him, saying it meant he could now keep his human form while having the power of immortality, and Yi cheered like crazy that he was no longer a cockroach, leaping high in celebration while the god marveled that so few humans ever showed compassion to insects, yet this one had actually saved his companion. But when he landed, he felt something underfoot, and lifting his heel revealed little Fatty squished flat. The cockroach god raged that he had just crushed the very companion he risked his life to protect, and Yi instantly panicked, fearing that since he turned human for saving Fatty, stepping on him might reverse it and turn him back into a bug. He tried to calm down, knowing that his survival now depended on his acting skill, but the god cursed him as a fool and regretted choosing him at all. Before the tirade could continue, Yi burst into loud sobs, throwing himself to the ground in a dramatic performance, wailing that he had raised little Fatty himself only to lose him now, rolling in the dirt and bawling like he wanted to die. Watching this spectacle, the god hesitated, thinking that maybe this bond ran deeper than he thought, and he might have misjudged him. At last, he revealed the truth. Little Fatty wasn't dead. He had become Yi's guardian, bound by life and death, meaning as long as Yi lived, Fatty would revive endlessly. All he had to do was kill mutant monsters to refill the creature's energy. Yi looked at the toads he had planned to spare and changed his mind, deciding to make them remember the terror of being dominated by a human. The way he grabbed the toad was straight out of Attack on Titan. Huge, naked, steaming, and feral, and the beast leapt at him with force, smacking his cheek and bruising it, which only annoyed him more, as if the monster was trying to cosplay as Levi. He caught it, but the god warned him of its danger, and sure enough his palms burned. The toad's body secreted corrosive mucus. Yi screamed, dropping it, shaking his stinging hands, and because he was naked, his entire body wobbled as the toad's eyes locked on his crotch, mistaking it for a tiny caterpillar. The tongue shot out, split at the tip like a hand, and snatched him there, sending pain so sharp he screamed and jerked into the air before finally ripping the thing off. Defeated, he admitted he couldn't even beat a mutant toad, but the god scolded him, saying the beast was using its abilities while Yi just flailed useless. He reminded him that he had granted him the trait devour all things. If he ate the toad, he'd gain its powers. The god shoved the squirming beast at him, commanding him to swallow it raw, declaring that devouring everything was the path to godhood. Yi begged to at least cook it first, but the god forced it into his mouth. The moment his tongue touched the flesh, all 10,000 of his taste buds shrieked in agony. It was so vile he gagged and vomited, refusing to continue. But the god warned him that if he didn't, he would die. And as if on cue, dozens of toads leapt at him, surrounding him from all sides. Yi froze, but then remembered the life he lived before, working himself to death for scraps while starving. Yet here, food was being handed to him, literally jumping into his mouth. Realizing he had no right to complain, he bit down and devoured the creature, triggering the system as Devour All Things activated. The screen notified him of absorbed traits: corrosive mucus, frog leap, elastic muscles. Strength surged through him, and suddenly he felt reborn. Yai declared that their tricks were useless now and launched into battle like a gymnast on steroids, flipping, spinning, and crushing toads left and right until every one of them was dead. Standing among their corpses, he whispered that invincibility was such a lonely thing. Then a blinding light struck him, forcing him to shield his eyes. Out of the glare emerged armored military vehicles, their guns raised. A soldier shouted that they had found a naked weirdo doing unspeakable things to the toads. Yi, still covered in blood, asked if they had come to rescue, but before he could finish, the order was given to execute. Darts pierced his skin as the extermination squad surrounded him. Just moments earlier, he had recognized their insignia on the trucks, the extermination unit, humanity's strongest force against the apocalypse. Each member was an elite awakener, tasked with hunting monsters across the surface, inside the abysses, tracking new rifts in real time, and maintaining order in the cities. It was said that those who lived under their protection had already returned to a life as peaceful as before the disaster. But for Yi, the squad meant something else: judgment. Running into them made Ye think he was about to be rescued, but to his shock, he was shot down instead. He hit the ground hard as soldiers moved in to capture him, but to their surprise, his body trembled, and he slowly pushed himself up. The trait elastic muscles had activated, giving him full control over every muscle in his body and allowing him to dodge attacks with unnatural agility. Because of that, the dart arrows slipped right out of his skin. The soldiers instantly deemed him dangerous and shifted into combat position. Ye raised his hands and begged for a chance to explain, but before he could, an order to fire was shouted, until another voice cut through the chaos. The squad turned their heads to see a woman perched on top of the military truck, commanding them to capture him alive. She was their captain. Ye grew irritated, muttering if these people really couldn't understand human speech. Then, the wheels roared to life as bikers surrounded him, ropes in hand. In an instant, cords wrapped around his neck, arms, and legs, and the bikers accelerated in opposite directions, stretching him out midair like he was being ripped apart. His veins bulged as he screamed in agony, but then he activated corrosive mucus, his body secreting a deadly acid that burned through the ropes. The captain noticed the effect, narrowing her eyes as the bikers crashed, and she realized with certainty he was an awakener too. She barked the order to catch him, and the squad swarmed. A green-haired soldier lunged, grappling Ye's torso, only to scream when his hand sizzled from the acid. Another fighter vaulted into the air, slamming a punch at him, but Ye twisted away and debris exploded from the ground. A third came at him with a bat, swinging wide, but Ye dropped to his knees and arched back, sliding under the strike like a gymnast. He called for his cheat code, and the system answered with frog leap. In a blink, he was already a great distance away. Ye laughed and mocked them for being too slow, but his victory was cut short when he tripped, his ankle snared by a glowing purple rope. His heart sank as he traced it back to the waifu-tier captain who had been calmly watching from the sideline. She asked if he really thought he had escaped, then reeled him in effortlessly. More ropes snaked from her fingers, binding his entire body. She leapt down, tightened the binding, stomped him into the dirt, and clipped the rope to her motorbike. With a roar of the engine, she dragged him mercilessly through the dirt as he screamed, "Spare me!" They tore across the wasteland until the towering walls of Vermilion Birdgate came into view. A soldier announced that Vice Captain Eileen had returned, and the gates cracked open just wide enough to let them in. Once inside, she halted, and Ye was hauled straight to the extermination squad's prison. Walking beside him were two women in lab coats while Eileen led from the front. Ye pleaded, saying he was harmless, and in a world like this being naked shouldn't be a crime. One of the women was shocked he could talk at all, whispering that he was different from the last 12. Eileen warned them to stay sharp. Over the past week, 12 unidentified refugees had arrived, all naked, all grinning, and completely. Tests showed they were normal humans, but she admitted something about them felt off. The woman on the left suggested killing them all to avoid risk, but her partner countered that executing people just for being impaired or ugly would make them no better than the monsters outside. She insisted they wait for the gene test results tomorrow. Yi realized he'd been arrested just for matching their profile. His mind raced as he thought about the gene test, asking the cockroach god if such a thing could expose him. The god had no idea what it was, and Ye felt dread sink in. He was screwed. The cell door creaked open, and Eileen told him whether he was a pervert or one of the 12, he'd better sit tight and behave. Ye asked why the lights were off. One of the women noticed vacant chairs and questioned her colleague if the prisoners had been moved, because only one remained. The ponytailed woman denied it, confused. That's when they noticed the truth. The missing prisoners weren't gone. They were clinging silently to the ceiling. The last man left in the chair raised his head, his skull grotesquely swelling as the squad froze in shock, watching every single one of the so-called refugees transform into horrors above them. Yi asked what the hell that thing was. The prisoners' heads swelled like balloons, keeping their twisted bodies floating, their faces frozen in creepy smiles that made his skin crawl. Behind him, one of the tied prisoners let out a roar, its skull splitting open as something grotesque pushed its way out. Ye and the ponytailed researcher spun around just in time to see it. A monster shaped like a rotting tree, mushrooms sprouting from its skull, 3 eyes glaring, a mouth full of spikes, and vines whipping through the air. The vines lashed out, wrapping around them, before lunging straight for Eileen. She flipped back, avoiding the strike, her sharp eyes narrowing as she realized this was its true form. But then the researcher beside him started convulsing, her body erupting in boils that spread like wildfire, multiplying instantly. Ye looked down and panicked when he saw the same thing happening to him, confused until the cockroach god's voice echoed in his mind, telling him he had been parasitized and that if he didn't chew through the pores immediately, he'd end up a mindless zombie. The monster laughed, declaring it wanted his body. Eileen froze, stunned that it could actually speak, admitting she had never encountered a species like this before. The researchers moved like puppets, their eyes blank as they charged at her. Eileen fired her ropes, launching herself onto the ceiling to escape, cursing under her breath about how parasite-type monsters were always a nightmare to deal with. She couldn't just rush in. Her powers weren't suited for it, and without any magic crystals on hand, her options were slim. Then her eyes caught a glint on the table, scalpels. She snatched one, flung it with precision, but the monster lashed out its vines, pulling the infected researchers in front as Eileen cursed, jerking her rope back in an emergency stop, realizing she could have hit the hostages. The monster mocked her as cowardly. Meanwhile, Ye was writhing on the ground, gnashing his teeth as the parasite drilled deeper. He shouted that he couldn't eat it fast enough, but the cockroach god barked at him to quit whining and swallow it whole. With no choice, he bit down and gulped it, the system instantly triggering. Parasitic spore devoured, resistance to parasites rising to 45%. Above, Eileen hurled more scalpels, this time lacing them with her threads to bend their trajectory around the human shields. One pierced the creature cleanly, making it screech in shock. As she suspected, its true body was fragile, which was why it needed hosts. But her triumph was short-lived, because the damage transferred. The researchers bled from the same wounds, restoring the monster as they weakened. Eileen cursed under her breath, realizing just how troublesome this fight would be. Then the monster sneered, pointing out the spores crawling under her skin. She looked down in horror as her own arm twisted unnaturally, fingers clamping around her throat. It was trying to make her strangle herself. For a moment she struggled, but then she smiled, wrapping her strings around her arms and looping them to her thigh. She restrained her own movement, using her web to puppeteer herself. If it had been anyone else, they'd already be dead, but she could even control her own body with her silk. She slung another scalpel, striking the monster again, smirking that it underestimated her. The creature snarled, warning that her reckless moves would only bleed her dry and leave her useless. It offered her an escape, but she spat back that she'd never run, not until she cut it down. Meanwhile, Ye was still crunching and chewing through spores, his grotesque sounds catching the monster's attention. It realized it couldn't control him, so it decided to kill him instead. Ye froze, knowing he couldn't dodge the incoming strike, until threads suddenly wrapped around his body and yanked him out of the way. In a blur, he was pulled straight toward Eileen, the monster left stunned. Ye screamed at the top of his lungs, tumbling into safety beneath her, only to look up and immediately get a nosebleed when he caught a glimpse of her underwear. His face went red as he stammered his thanks for saving him. Eileen stared down at him in disbelief, utterly speechless, then sighed in disgust as she realized he wasn't one of the parasite victims at all, just a shameless pervert. Ye, flustered, shouted that he had been saying that all along. Eileen shook her head, exhaling sharply, then told him straight. Since the monster couldn't infect him, they had 2 choices. Either they both die here, or she buys time while he runs to get help. Ye froze, hating both options. Then he clenched his teeth, stood up, and declared his own. Option C. Eileen blinked and asked what the hell he meant. Yu's eyes burned with determination as he pointed at the writhing mushroom beast and shouted that they'd team up and blow that ugly freak to pieces. She couldn't believe how recklessly eager he was to throw away his life and demanded to know why. Ye's determined look hardened as he recalled the time he was abandoned as bait, left to die, and he answered through gritted teeth that he despised people who abandoned their teammates. In his eyes, cowards who ran when monsters appeared were worse than the monsters themselves. Eileen muttered that he was a brave young hero, but deep inside she thought he was just a reckless idiot. In truth, Ye wasn't rushing in blindly. He was already prepared, because the system had revealed the monster's true body was weak, and now that he was immune to parasitism, he believed he could take it down and secure a safe position under the extermination squad's protection. The mushroom-like abomination sneered, mocking that even in battle humans still thought about impressing women and calling it pathetic. Dozens of vines lashed forward in fury. Ye knew Eileen could control bodies with her strings and shouted for her to hurry up and control him too, since he wasn't afraid of parasites, but admitted he didn't even know how to fight. Reluctantly, Eileen flicked her fingers, sending strands of silk latching onto him, warning that she couldn't guarantee his safety. Ye grinned and told her to go for it. Guided like a combat puppet, he charged in headfirst. The monster scoffed, confident that he'd be cut down immediately, and threw one of the possessed researchers at him. Eileen snapped her fingers and moved Ye's body just right so he grappled the researcher and shoved her down harmless. Another controlled host lunged at him, but with Eileen's threads pulling the strings, Ye slid low between their legs and leapt up into the air. The monster narrowed its eyes, realizing he was moving faster and sharper than before, and it dawned on it that the woman was puppeteering him. Eileen smirked and muttered that maybe the mushroom wasn't as brainless as it looked. Ye roared, pulling back his fist and screaming for it to die. The vines shot out, weaving into a thick barrier to shield the core, and the monster scoffed that he was far too weak to break through. But in that instant, two traits flared at once: elastic muscles and corrosive mucus. Ye's fist smashed through, burning and tearing, slamming into its torso. The monster gagged, coughing up green blood, its body sizzling where his acid touched, leaving a gaping hole through its chest. Eileen's eyes widened, stunned that Ye had hidden such terrifying abilities. The monster screamed in denial, trying to transfer the damage to its hosts, but nothing happened. It turned in horror and saw Eileen crouched by the researchers, spores already ripped out of their bodies and crushed in her palm, mocking that she couldn't wait to carve it up piece by piece. The beast was enraged, its ugly face twisting with fury. Suddenly, the balloon-headed humans floating above burst, spraying blood that streamed back into its body. Before their eyes, its wounds closed, and its form melted into a hideous transformation. The tree-like body collapsed into a red, gelatinous mass, reshaping itself into a towering, muscular humanoid, skin dripping like slime, 4 glowing eyes glaring with hunger, rows of teeth snapping, and a tongue uncoiling like a whip. Its presence was overwhelming, and even Ye had to admit it resembled something straight out of red venom. The monster growled that they were the first humans to witness its true form and promised it wouldn't disappoint. In a blur, its massive fist was already at Eileen's face. She barely registered the speed before she was sent flying, smashing into a wall with bone-cracking force. Ye's heart sank. Neither of them expected it to be this much stronger. Before she could recover, it lunged again, seizing her by the head and dragging her across the floor, grinding her into the ground before hurling her like a rag doll. She coughed up blood, curling into herself as pain racked her body. But the monster twitched and turned back, realizing an attack had just landed. It was Ye. Despite the fear, he'd struck it again. Snarling, the beast closed the gap instant, this time not holding back, and punched him with full force. Ye was launched like a broken doll, crashing down beside the researcher, his body limp. The system blared warnings. All bones shattered, internal organs crushed, fatal injuries detected, triggering immortality. His body twitched violently as regeneration kicked in, tissues weaving back together until he gasped awake, groaning that he really had almost died. Beside him, the cockroach god appeared, warning in a grim tone that if he took another hit like that, even he might not be able to save him. Ye swallowed nervously and immediately decided to play dead, lying still as he prayed Eileen could somehow handle it. The monster loomed over him, mocking his weakness, but suddenly heard a snap behind it. Spinning around, it saw Eileen, battered but defiant, springing in for a kick. Its reflexes were too sharp. It caught her leg midair. She had no idea how it happened. Her leg was caught, and the monster swung her side to side, smashing her into the ground like a rag doll. Over and over it slammed her until finally it hurled her upward. She hit the ceiling hard, spitting blood before crashing back down. The creature reached for the chair Ye had been tied to earlier, muttering how uncomfortable it was. And as Eileen fell, it swung the chair like a bat, striking her midair and sending her crashing into the wall again. More blood burst from her mouth, both legs clearly broken. Yet she refused to give up, trying to fight on with just her arms. Ye watched in disbelief. If even the vice captain of the extermination squad couldn't beat this thing, then who could save them? His thoughts were interrupted by the faint voice of the injured researcher, telling him to get the vice captain to unleash her full power. She opened her palm and revealed a glowing red crystal. Yi grabbed it, but then panicked. How could he get it to her? The cockroach god offered a grim solution. If he pushed his elastic muscles to the absolute limit and charged, he might find an opening, though the success rate was only 10%. Ye cursed, realizing it was basically suicide. But the god reminded him that 10% survival was better than certain death. Grinding his teeth, Ye roared and launched himself forward with all his strength. The monster instantly noticed him and reacted faster than expected, the cockroach god's estimate plummeting to 5%. Ye leapt high, trying to vault over it, but the god muttered the chance had dropped to 1%. Still, he refused to quit, aiming straight for Eileen, until the monster caught his leg midair, sneering as it slammed him down into the ground with crushing force. The cockroach god declared the chance was now 0%. Dazed and broken in a dented floor, Ye saw the monster lift its foot to stomp his head in. But instead of despair, he wore determination, thinking that as long as he was alive, he hadn't hit 0% yet. With his last ounce of strength, he hurled the crystal toward Eileen, screaming for her to catch it. The stomp came down, but the monster's foot stopped short of his skull. Spider silk had wrapped around him, protecting him. The beast whipped its head toward Eileen, who stood, legs patched with silk, acknowledging that Ye had risked his life just to get the crystal to her. Deeply moved, she poured her full strength into her ability. Silk threads shot from her fingers, binding the monster tight and yanking it down. Her hand morphed into a blade, and she announced, "Spider Snowblade, unsheathed," before slashing, but the monster's form suddenly vanished. Shocked, she turned, only for it to reappear towering over her. Mocking that even humans who could wield power were still too weak, it snapped her blade and used the broken edge to pierce straight through her torso. Ye's eyes went wide as she fell motionless, blood spilling, while the monster prepared to stab her again. But before it could, its arms were severed clean off, and Eileen's limp body was caught by a tall brown-haired man. The monster snarled, spinning to face its new enemy, only to see a massive, muscular figure walking away with her in his arms. Behind him appeared two more, a silver-haired woman with glasses and a tall maroon-haired man draped in a brown cape. All of them wore the same squad uniform. Ye realized reinforcements had arrived. The woman quickly knelt beside the fallen researchers, checking their condition, and grimly noting that their organs, bones, and flesh were mangled. Urgent treatment was required. She was Captain Haley of Extermination Squad 10. The bulky man carrying Eileen was Foe, captain of Squad 2, who calmly reassured Haley that no monster would get near her while he stood guard. The tall man with the cape stepped forward, introducing himself as Chief Commander Cory Veron, saying with amusement that a talking monster was rare, and he'd be the one to play with it for a while. Eileen stirred weakly in Foe's arms, coughing blood as she warned Cory that this creature was different and urged him to be careful. The commander smirked, replying that she needn't worry because he was built differently too. Haley snapped at them to shut up. She needed absolute silence for treatment. Activating her green crystal, she began her healing work while the others prepared to face the monster. A root burst from the ground as Haley activated her technique, Runic Revival, wrapping the injured researchers inside giant blooming flowers, even placing Eileen and Ye inside one as well. Ye was bewildered by the sight but then felt an incredible warmth, as though he were soaking in a hot spring, and his eyes began to close, until the cockroach god suddenly appeared, yelling at him not to pass out and jolting him with a surge of adrenaline that burned through his veins and forced him awake in agony. Haley noticed his reaction, confused because the healing process wasn't supposed to hurt, while the cockroach god told Ye he was lucky and urged him to open his eyes to witness the true peak of the era. Cory Veron introduced himself to the monster, remarking that since it could understand human speech, they might as well have a chat. But the monster sneered that it didn't converse with food. Cory frowned, especially when blood began dripping from the cracks in the ceiling, steadily pooling until it formed twisted shapes. Captives the monster had devoured, now reborn as its army, claiming that all of them would die there. The swarm charged, aiming straight for Haley, and Ye panicked as they came from every direction. But Foe immediately assumed a combat stance and unleashed a punch so powerful it created shockwaves that tore through the incoming beasts. Haley then manipulated the air, weaving the wind around the flowers until it formed a swirling cyclone barrier, guarding them from harm. Foe could handle the monsters, and Haley, the Blood Rain. But Ye's jaw dropped in awe at witnessing firsthand the overwhelming power of two Captain-class Awakeners. The main monster reveled in having stalled them and declared that its first true target was Cory. Liquefying lesser beasts and absorbing them into itself, the monster transformed grotesquely, sprouting 2 additional heads and arms until it stood as a towering abomination. Ye screamed that it wasn't fair, pulling off a 3-stage transformation, while Cory chuckled that he envied creatures that could grow bigger at will, unlike himself who had to go through an entire process. The monster threw a colossal punch, but Cory sidestepped effortless, teasing that it nearly grazed him. Furious, it launched more attacks, but Cory bent, crouched, and leapt with perfect timing, dodging like an elusive insect, enraging the monster further. When a vine finally coiled around Cory's torso, the monster roared that he was finished, but Cory simply drew his blade and unleashed a flurry of slashes, shredding the creature before landing gracefully. The beast trembled, unable to comprehend what had just happened, as Cory calmly walked forward and, with a mere flick of his finger, disintegrated its massive body into dust, leaving behind only a tiny mushroom-like core. With casual ease, he snatched it up and sealed it in a bottle, smiling like a man who had just caught a rare Pokemon and gleefully asking if he had the honor of naming it, only to have Haley shout at him to quit messing around and think about explaining the destruction of an entire new research facility to the council. Both Haley and Foe sighed in unison, muttering about their stupid boss. Ye couldn't fathom such overwhelming strength, and the Cockroach god asked if he understood the sheer gap between himself and that man, then granted him permission to finally pass out. Don't forget to like the video and activate the cheeky little bell for the second part.